I'm going to push this button and I'll see what happens. All right. Prolonged exposure to stress. Now, we can have emotional stress, psychological stress, physical stress. There's like different types of stresses, but they will lead to common ground of inflammation. And it was my joy to be able to research some of the literature, which is what I really like doing as part of my job description, and learning all this stuff. And so we were able to correlate with numerous articles and literature research that, this stress will lead to aging, it leads to inflammation. So that was an important aspect of it. So, it burns up the body. It's a terrible situation that we live in society, that we're always under stress. Just trying to live, driving to work every day for some of you is a very severe stress. Otherwise, it's, having to fulfill your obligations in your home and your family and your occupation. So we all have this problem. And so I'm really proud to be affiliated with a company that at least has part of a solution for these problems that everybody on the planet faces. Now, stress has effect on the autonomic nervous system. It has biochemical responses. It leads to chronic, sometimes what's called silent inflammation, and what's called free radical damage. Now, free radicals are a little bit more difficult to explain unless you're, have some background in science or chemistry, but they're basically molecules that have lost an electron and they steal electrical or life energy from other molecules. So they're basically thieves. And those of you who've been involved in the stock market and things like that are familiar with thieves. Or bankers. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, so we can get cellular dysfunction, organ damage, and can lead to aging. When you're looking at how the body and the mind are not two different entities. They are a global integration. I always think of the mind as a field that expands around the body. It's not in the brain. It encompasses the whole body. For those of you who are doing work in, say, massage, you've worked with people, you've pressed on certain parts of their body, let's say their knee, and next thing you know, they're crying and having a flashback of a trauma that occurred because that memory is stored in the tissues. Memories are not stored just in the brain. The brain is a good retrieval library for memories, but memories are stored in every cell of the body. It's a very interesting phenomenon. So when you're looking at the mind and body. And so what happens is every cell of the body is affected when you're under emotional or physiological stress. Because the whole body is a hologram. The body is a complete integration. Every cell of the body contains the DNA that can make the entire body. That is an amazing piece of information, is that any single cell can grow an entire body. Everything. The skin cell can make a liver. And so this is a fascination that, what science is going through right now and learning how to manipulate these. So we're on the verge. We're probably the last generation right now that will not have long life, except we have the opportunity to participate with David's brilliance and genius of a technology that may help as a transition. So I like to look at LifeWave as a transitionary product. As we learn more and more, you're able to survive, you're able to thrive, you're able to, live your life in a healthy fashion as we make further and further steps in our knowledge base in biology. When we hit 100 billion people on the planet, we probably need to slow down about that time. But otherwise, at this point, let's just try to keep living today. And so LifeWave is for today, anti-aging. And so one of the things we see, and I don't want to steal the thunder of one of our really brilliant NASA-based scientists, to Dr. Brzezinski. I don't know if you know that he was also involved in some of the space program as well as experimental research planes and things like I think the Blackbird, the SSR, was it 71? 71, yeah. Yeah, he was the guy that filled up the gas tank with, so the guy that runs out with the hose and fills that was what he did on that project. I'm sure he's going to get me later for that one. Anyway, so stress activates the sympathetic nervous system. We don't have time to go through an entire biology course, but the autonomic nervous system has a sympathetic, an accelerator, and a braking component called the parasympathetic. That's the relaxation response modifier. And so when you have aging, what we see with aging is an increase in the activity of the sympathetic nervous system and in a somewhat overbalance. And so it's higher and the parasympathetic set lower. And that is a stress response. And so what we want to do is get increased parasympathetic activity to compensate. Because when you have low parasympathetic, it's unhealthy. And one of the things we've seen with our Aeon, I'll try to get it out. I can say X15 all night, but I'm going to work on it. With the Aeon is that we can reset to some degree or bring you toward the parasympathetic state. So that's an anti-stress response. Now, chronic stress also leads to pain and fatigue. One of the things some of the phenomena we've seen, now we have had hundreds of people try the technology before. This is our biggest launch ever. We had like 500 people in one pilot study alone. So we've had information from hundreds of people, and many people will express that they have less pain. And I'm talking about pain from some really serious conditions. In 24 hours, Dr. Koala did one of the studies with us, and she's reporting on these they were out of pain after the first 24 hours. And this is the only patch they were wearing. They weren't even wearing IceWave. So that was phenomenally impressive. We also had a lot of people report that they had more energy, more lifting of mood. Well, I mean, that alone itself is if we didn't come out and say anything else, but, some people will have a mood lift with this patch. You got a multi-billion-dollar patch product right there. Now, I don't know how many of the people that's going to relate to, but the fact is, if it's even 10%, it'll be impressive. But I don't know what the number's going to be. But it's it's just kind of an ancillary thing we noticed. Now, some people got more fatigued. Wait a minute, we got more energy? Well, we had some detox reactions too. So what I do is you have to modulate your use of the patch. You might not be able to use it 12 hours a day. You might only be able to use it 1 to 2 to 4 hours a day when you first start off. We have Michael Collins over here somewhere. And when he had the glutathione patch came out, he could only use it for an hour a day. He had such a detox, and he had to work himself up. So each person has to learn to functionally look at their own responses. But I'm giving you some global concepts. So we're looking at the fact that inflammatory chemicals inflame the body, inflame the brain, and lead to sickness, malaise, and tiredness. And we seem to have some reduction or reversal in that process. And so we've seen more energy and less pain as a consistent factor, as well as some mood lift. There we go. Here's some of the biochemical markers of inflammation. Now, this is basically more for the scientific people in the audience, and others are going to go, well, I don't know what he's talking about. Well, C-reactive protein is an inflammatory marker. There's a lot of information about it in the cardiovascular literature and in the central nervous system literature. The higher the levels of C-reactive protein, the greater your chance of having strokes or heart attacks. The higher the levels of C-reactive protein, the greater your chance of having strokes or heart attacks, as well as cancerous causation. Increased fibrinogen is a protein in the blood. If there's too much fibrinogen, your blood gets too thick. And we'll probably repeat this a little bit or later. Homocysteine is an inflammatory oxidative chemical that's involved in heart disease, and when it's increased, it's an inflammatory marker. Lipid peroxides, basically that's like, that's damage to the cell membranes. So when you have an elevation of lipid peroxides, your cells have been damaged by free radicals. It's the toxic component that occurs when you damage fats. Now we also can increase cytokine. These are basically inflammatory chemicals. And whenever you have inflammation, you have an imbalance of elevation of what are called inflammatory cytokines. And all of these will lead to an increase in damage to the DNA. So if you can control your inflammatory markers, you are able to reduce your chance of having increased DNA damage. I hope everybody followed that. So here's an example of somebody with a chronic condition. And this is daily inflammation. Sustained over a lifetime is an underlying cause of aging. So, this is what you're trying to do. Now, most people who have inflammation don't have it this prominent. I had to pick a slide that you'd have something to see. Put a picture of my hand up there. You don't see anything, except I probably need to cut my fingernails. But I like to dig in my garden, so that helps with the digging. Now, normal aging is like a healthy ecosystem, so I represent it by this healthy butterfly. But as you start getting into disease processes, oxidative stress and inflammation, you get into accelerated aging, as I represented by this dead butterfly. All right, this thing should work. There it goes. Now, silent, persistent inflammation is responsible for many of the chronic diseases of aging. So this is why we call it an anti-aging product. Because one of the effects, not the effect, but one of the effects we've seen is this patch will reduce inflammatory markers. That is powerful. Now, chronic continuous inflammation creates oxidative stress, immune system breakdown, and errors where the body loses its ability to distinguish normal tissue from abnormal tissue or foreign invaders. So when this occurs, the body begins to attack both healthy as well as injured cells and leads to organ damage. So this may have some beneficial effects in supporting the health of many people. I'm going to leave it there at that point. Now, cumulative oxidative stress plays a major role in cellular aging. So chronic inflammation and oxidative stress causes damage to the cell membranes. Every cell in the body is surrounded by a membrane. Every organelle, every little structure inside the cell has its own individual membrane. So when you damage these, you damage the communication system of the body. You damage the control mechanisms of the body. You damage the ability of the body to control the transport of nutrients in and the transport of toxins out of the body. So when you start repairing this, you start changing these factors. And so what we want to see is we want to start repairing tissue, and so we want to move from organ dysfunction toward improved organ function. Now, our electrointerstitial scan showed that the Aeon patches improve cellular physiological function measurements. Now, this is one way of looking at it, and it's certainly not the only way of looking at it. But it's a starting point. I wish we could have done 100,000 tests before we came and said, we've done 45 years of research here on this product, but we've only had a year. But we've done 8 major studies so far, and so we're reporting on some of these today. Now, oxidative stress typically increases with age, resulting from increased free radical production and declining antioxidant defenses. So if you can support antioxidant support, if you can control free radicals, if you control free inflammation, you're having an anti-aging response. So anything that can reduce these properties is going to reduce cellular deterioration and organ deterioration. And so Aeon should be used with carnosine and glutathione patches. And we've actually got several studies, one almost completed and one just getting started, and then we have others on the board where we're doing all 3 patches together. And David reported on one of the studies that's being done by several doctors in another country where they're looking at 90 days, where they're looking at these changes in the skin when they're using all 3 patches, and we're getting positive reports from that. So we'll see as this continues. But this is the type of thing. So the suggestion is, well, that's why we include it in the Y-age system. Now, oxidative stress will damage particular structures in the body, particularly mitochondria, DNA, protein, and as well as the lipid molecules. And genetic damage increases with age as well. And so what we want to do is, if we can control inflammation, we can reduce genetic damage. And that's the goal. We're going to be doing primary genetic testing in the future. We haven't gotten to that yet, but because we only just learned of some of these phenomena in the last 90 days. And so when you start looking at it, they're going, wow, this does this. Well, if this does this, then this probably leads that we need to check this out. So that's how the research kind of organically grows. Now, David, with my permission, got this slide, and I made it up, and he said, I like this slide, I want to use it. I'm like, well, we were in Tokyo years ago, and he said, I got this great joke I want to share with the audience, and he told me his joke. So I got to speak ahead of him. You know what I did? So right before he got up there, I stole his joke, and I said, I'm really surprised when I arrived in Tokyo today at how many tall buildings you had, considering how many times Godzilla has destroyed the city. And David got up and said, I'm going to get you back one day. So anyway, he borrowed this slide, and I like the slide because it kind of gives you an idea of where the product, in one slide, just kind of where the product is positioned and what we're trying to do. So, if we're moving, I don't want to run out of time, from activated nervous system, a sympathetic activation, into parasympathetic, you're reducing stress. So that alone is helping with physiological stress reduction. It's just rebalancing the nervous system. And so when we see that stress increases the sympathetic nervous system, and when you activate the sympathetic, you're increasing inflammatory chemicals in the body. So if you can reduce that sympathetic activation, that's going to have a mechanism where the inflammatory chemicals start coming down. Does that make sense? Okay. So what we're doing is controlling inflammation helps reduce tissue damage and improve quality of life. And so there, this slide's a little complicated, so I just wanted to cover just one little component of it. So, what we're trying to do is we're trying to change that activation into sympathetic, and we're trying to change that activation into inflammatory chemicals. And we want to work on reducing that inflammatory response. So here we have parasympathetic activity, curb sympathetic activity. And so we see also DHEA reduces oxidative stress and increases inflammatory signals. Now, let's look at some of the lab work we found. Fibrinogen is a protein made by the liver that rises sharply in any condition that causes inflammation or tissue damage. So high fibrinogen level is significantly associated with heart disease, as well as blockages of the arteries in the neck and strokes. And these conditions cause 60% of the deaths in the elderly. Now, high fibrinogen levels can cause heart attacks or strokes via several mechanisms, particularly blood thickening. So basically the blood gets real sticky and it tends to clot easier. And those people with high fibrinogen were more than twice as likely to die from a heart attack. So a team of scientists in China compared fibrinogen levels in 2 different family groups. 7 families had a history of long life compared to 9 families, and there were like 150 people in the study, so it wasn't just 2 people, with traditionally shorter lifespans, and they concluded that the low plasma fibrinogen levels are correlated with longer life. We found in our Aeon testing a trend toward lower fibrinogen levels. So that was a marker for inflammation. Elevated C-reactive protein is a biochemical marker of underlying chronic inflammation. C-reactive proteins often sharply increased in aged people with multiple degenerative diseases. And systemic chronic inflammation plays a central role in age-related diseases. I just realized we were translating this into multiple languages and the translators are going crazy because I'm talking too fast. So I got to slow down. They're going like, oh, thank you. All right, so systemic chronic inflammation plays a central role in age-related diseases. So if we can control inflammation, we help with the other side of the coin, okay? So people with high levels of C-reactive protein, which is one of the cardinal markers of inflammation, are over 4 times as likely to have heart attacks as those with low levels. Now, this is actually a referenced lecture. And what I mean by this is just about every statement that I put on the paper, on the slideshow, came from a medical research study. That's when you see the little name with the number or date beside it. That's because I had like 18 or 19, whatever, research studies. I went through 1,000 to find those 19 because I was trying to put a story together that explained what we were doing. So Aeon testing showed a trend toward lower C-reactive protein levels. That was another marker that we were reducing inflammation. Now, varying high degrees of homocysteine, high levels of homocysteine, are detectable in all inflammatory conditions. And it's a marker for inflammation. Well, another marker for inflammation. So high homocysteine, as a result, leads to oxidative stress and acute and chronic inflammation. So that's an important marker if you're trying to see how much inflammation this person has. We can look at homocysteine levels. Excuse me for a second. Now, organs most affected by chronic inflammation, including the brain. What do you see with brain inflammation? You see diseases, Parkinsonism, Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis. Just about any neurological disease that you can name has an inflammatory component. Heart, which is one of the major killers in the world, or industrialized nations at least, is related to inflammatory processes. Kidney problems. You have inflammatory processes underlying the role of many kidney disease. Lungs. People that have lung problems usually have inflammatory processes. Arteries. So we see these inflammatory markers or inflammatory mediators are going to be involved in damaging all of these organs. So homocysteine-induced oxidative stress damages blood vessels. Well, where do the blood vessels go? Everywhere you got an organ. And it favors damage to the cell membranes, lipid peroxidation. So it induces the production of inflammatory factors. So we see that aging is associated with oxidative stress and inflammation. And Aeon testing showed a trend of lower homocysteine levels, showing an impact on both inflammation and oxidation. So why are lipid peroxides important? The level of lipid peroxides is a reflection, as I've said, of membrane damage caused by the action of what are we known as free radicals, electron-deficient molecules. The elevation of lipid peroxides is an early warning of the effects of oxidative stress. So the outcome of long-term oxidative stress is degenerative diseases. If you get degenerative diseases accelerated, you have accelerated aging. So these are things that you don't want to have unless you're really unhappy in your life. And then you might want to have them, but otherwise, no, you don't. So the concentration of lipid peroxides progressively increases with age. So this is a reflection of an aging marker. So this is a reflection of, impaired antioxidant defenses. So your antioxidant defenses decline with age. So these are all important. So if we can see here, I don't think I have a laser here, so we're going to have to, maybe I do. Yeah. Wow. You can look here, this is cell membrane. It's a lipid bilayer. And up here it's damaged. Now what occurs is these are what we call reactive oxygen species. These are free radicals. They've damaged the cell membrane. That's going to interfere with the control mechanism of the cell. The cell membrane controls the mineral content of the inside of the cell, which is different from the outside. And when the cell is damaged, you will get increase of sodium into the cell, and you'll lose your magnesium and your potassium. So you see sick people tend to have low magnesium and low potassium because they've urinated it away. And over time, the more stress you get, the lower your magnesium and potassium. And one thing is leg cramps or heart arrhythmias, and there's a list of 100 and something things long that magnesium deficiency can cause. I know Dr. Rowe knows this, and we're going to give him up here later, and he's going to recite them all for us. But, oops. So anyway, what we're looking at is you're controlling your transport also through the cell of all your nutrients, of all your wastes. So if you can repair or at least reduce the damage to your cell membrane, you can affect the health of the cells. And that's what I'm trying to make the point here. So damage to the structure of cell membrane, lipids leads to changes in the permeability, changes in the transport, changes in the communication. A healthy organism has good communication. A healthy family has good communication. An unhealthy family is they're not talking to each other or they're communicating dysfunctionally. So you want to get any system that you want operating smoothly, you want it to communicate properly. And so what we're doing is we could call the Aeon patch an improved cell communicator. So there's lots of things you could go at with this patch. This is why David and I were struggling on what do we say this one does. Wow, we got 20 things here. Let's pick something, I was all for putting it all in the hat and picking out one, But, he said, no, we got to have something that kind of covers and gives them a broader understanding. And so that's what we're trying to do. This doesn't do one thing. This has lots of nice effects. So we're hoping you'll discover this over time for yourself and for the people you try it on. And we've had, probably 1,000 people have tried this. We've had some wonderful reports from around the world. And we want this to continue. This is a life-changing patch. Yellow. That must mean I'm getting close to being out of time. All right, mitochondrial insufficiency. We know the Aeon patches have been reported to increase energy. So I'm going to have to go a little faster because I'm about to run out of time here. So if we look at, in a summary, reduction of inflammation by Aeon, we had a decreased C-reactive protein, decreased fibrinogen, decreased homocysteine, decreased lipid peroxides. So when we look at antioxidants and anti-inflammatories are protective. And so we have a nice Y-age system. We had something that we brought a new product to the table that did something different than anything we've had before. So take home, Aeon reduces stress, is measured by increased activity of the parasympathetic nervous system, reduces biochemical markers of inflammation, and by reducing tissue and organ damage, we can reduce the wear and tear associated with aging now, today. Now, I want you to memorize these references because I put a lot of time in here putting these things together. So I'm going to run through them here so you can all, make notes on every one of them here, okay? All right. Thank you very much.